Happy Monday to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I'm Jeremy Cordeaux. Peter Clayton is behind the camera. It's a lovely day, lovely time of the year. Last week of summer. Gee, I don't know. I don't think it's been a particularly bad one. A few hot days. Nice and mild today, I can tell you that. Before we get into the news of the day and the issues that I want to make mention of, happy birthday, happy wedding anniversary if it's a day you're celebrating. The Bank of England issues its first £1 note. What the hell would that be worth? If you're a coin collector and collected money. Well, you know, I mean, historically. The first banknote, well, a Bank of England banknote anyway, 1797. Wonder who was the first who came up with paper currency. I'll have to look it up. Radar, which is radio, direction and ranging. That's what radar stands for. I thought it was radar because it spelt radar backwards and forwards, which is what radar, of course, does. First demonstrated by Robert Watson Watt. That was in 1935. In the scheme of things, not so long ago. We've come a long way, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, speaking of coming a long way, the first flight of a space shuttle, it was on the top of a 747. Because the first time it got off the ground, I've seen pictures of it, looked very strange. And that was in 1977. A mere blink. The pop group ABBA arrived in Australia. Maybe you were there to greet them at the airport. Because I think Pete and I were just discussing that they were probably bigger here earlier than anywhere else in the world. That was also 1977. Elizabeth Taylor, English-American actress, businesswoman, humanitarian, father of the bride, Butterfield 8, and of course Cleopatra, more famous for her marriages, I suppose, than anything else. She was born in 1932. She died in 2011. Leonard Nimoy, the American actor, Star Trek, Spock, and all of that. Mission Impossible. He was also a director. 2015. He dies of heart disease in 1983. Charles Strite. The name doesn't mean much to me, but do you know what he did, what he's famous for? He was the American who invented the automatic pop-up toaster. 1878 he was born. Barbara Streisand reveals that she has had her beloved dog cloned twice. 2018 she made that confession. Never had any of the husbands cloned though. It's interesting. Spike Milligan died, 83, 2002. Where did he come from? Woy Woy or somewhere. He used to talk about it all the time. Made all his fortune out of the goons and being very funny in England. The first women's magazine. It was called Ladies' Mercury, published in London in 1693. Good God. Good God, good God, good God. The 22nd Amendment of the United States was passed, limiting US presidents to 2 terms, 1951, and Louis Vuitton, the French founder of the Louis Vuitton brand of leather goods, dies at 70. He was born, though, in 1892. And if you remember the day, for any reason, I hope, it's a great day. Speaking of presidents of the United States, a quote from the President, Joe Biden. The date was February the 2nd, 2023, and he is quoted here reliably, I believe. More than half the women in my administration are women. Doesn't he have the button to start World War III? I think he does. We're in safe hands, ladies and gentlemen. It's all right. I remind you that the United Nations has refused to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Useless bloody people they are. Price hikes for electricity on Friday coming into account almost immediately. Now, please understand that they are totally unnecessary. It's about unreliable renewables costing more and the manic ideological pursuit of them by this Labour government. The most energy-rich country in the world cannot possibly be short of reliable, cheap power. That is electricity. And if you don't like what's happening, just remember they were democratically elected. We don't have to elect them again. But please, let's learn some of these lessons. It's reporting season on the stock market. I look at this because it's an indicator of how well the economy is going. And just quickly, when interest rates, rule of thumb, when interest rates are low, the economy is on its knees. When interest rates are high, the economy is going gangbusters. But back to the stock market. Supermarkets are through the roof. Coles and Woolworths, profit up 14 to 17% over last year. Qantas, the spirit of Australia, $1 billion profit over just the last 6 months. Alan Joyce, lovely little leprechaun that he is, says great, and I can understand that, but if you look at it quite honestly, dispassionately, fewer flights, cost cutting, less staff, more lost luggage and higher prices. Could be a recipe for success, short term perhaps, but success. You can't deny that $1 billion turnaround in 6 months is pretty impressive, pretty good. Profits drive inflation. I had to think about that. That's according to the Australian Institute for Future Policy. The Australian Institute for Future Policy. I've never heard of them. Anyway, so says Sally McManus as well, by the way. Sally, you would know, is the head of the trade union movement. And you would know that profits, Sally, you would know that profits pay wages and employ people. And through your superannuation funds, you know, the industry super funds, the ones you own, which perform very well, by the way, thanks to the companies in which they are invested. Why? Well, because they are making a profit. A profit. And that profit is distributed to shareholders, of whom you are one. Somehow, you're trying to kind of walk both sides of the street here. You want wages to go up, which I think is inflationary. Where do you think, if wages go up, that money is going to come from? Profits. Profits. We're not dealing with stupid people here. I don't know what their game is. Do you want a whole lot of companies who are unprofitable or breaking even? Do you want to see people sacked? Your members? Because when companies aren't profitable, that's usually what happens. What's wrong with being profitable? I think the world is going barking mad. I did mention to you on Friday that I wanted to talk to you about something in particular. And I made some notes. An interesting story. In many ways, it's a kind of personal one as well. It caught my eye because a Chinese scientist, a doctor, a professor of pediatrics, he's been accused of producing genetically altered babies. And he's been sentenced to 3 years in jail. 3 years, playing God, they said. Now, if you save somebody's life, are you playing God or are you a guardian angel? His name is He Jiankui. guilty, the Chinese say, of medical malpractice, illegal medical practices and procedures. He stunned the world last year by announcing that he had helped to produce genetically edited babies. They put him in jail for 3 years. All this is about genetic modification or defective embryos that are fixed or cured or altered in utero. I don't know what the alternative would be. You'd have a disabled child born, or the mother may have an abortion. The defect in the gene is simply edited out. Gene editing. It's a very crude description of something that's very complicated, I know. But I've got an interesting story to tell you about this. All those common genetic disorders like Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, sickle cell disease, muscular dystrophy perhaps, deafness, maybe autism, blindness. There are lots and lots of these terrible things. What surprises me is that most of them, apparently, are totally preventable. It certainly surprised me, and it might surprise you to know that we were working on this breakthrough technology right here in Adelaide, in South Australia, in 1985. That's 30 years ago. I'll tell you the story. I was part of the setting up of a special unit to do exactly this sort of gene research. High-tech, futuristic, cutting-edge, preventative medicine. It goes back to the beginning, which was my introduction to a little boy called Martin van Arent. He had a serious liver disease and he was dying. I was chairman of the Variety Club at the time, and Variety looks after sick children. You would know that. We had to get him to America to get him a liver transplant. Anyway, we set about raising the money, $200,000 I think it was. That was to take Mum and Dad and the little boy to America and pay for the operation. A surgeon from the Royal Adelaide Hospital told me, "You don't have to go to America. For that $200,000 we could set up our own liver transplant unit right here." I was amazed. I spoke to John Cornwall, who was the Minister for Health in the then Bannon Labor government, and he said to me, no, a liver transplant unit would cost millions. But he said he'd check, and he did, and he rang me back and he said, "You're right. Let's do it. I don't know why we haven't done it before." So I said, well, terrific. The deal was that the Variety Club would put in half the money and the government would put in the other half, dollar for dollar, in other words. Now, unfortunately, little Martin died before we could get the whole thing up and running, and then Brisbane decided that it would establish a liver transplant unit. So we backed off because the country couldn't support 2 liver transplant units. But John said, "Would Variety like to put the money into another project?" So I took that back to the Variety Club, and it turned out to be the South Australian Child Health Research Institute. Now, I don't know if it exists today. The last time I heard that shortened its name to the Children's Research Institute, or CRI, C-R-I for short. But in the beginning, back in 85, the unit was leading the nation, if not the world. High-tech, intensive, futuristic, cutting-edge, best people in the world to do this research. Not just cure, mind you, not just curing childhood disease, but preventing it. Genetic engineering. It was an expression I was not familiar with at the time. Genetic engineering. To not treat, but wipe out some of the most debilitating, terrible childhood diseases imaginable. A lot of work and, of course, a lot of money. It's a long story, but there were setbacks and there were breakthroughs, and we attracted some brilliant people. The unit did some great research work, and not once did I hear anybody say, "You're playing God," or "You're trying to develop a master race." We're trying to develop a master race indeed, which is what they're saying in China to this poor scientist over there. Interfering with nature. Nope. Anyway, 30 years later, this guy's in jail for doing the stuff that we were doing, sanctioned and supported by the South Australian government, to not just help handicapped and disadvantaged children, but to prevent the disability in the first place. You know, it's a classic, you put the fence at the top of the cliff instead of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I think it was the 11th floor of the Clarence Richter building at the Children's Hospital that we were refurbishing and working to create this new unit. Variety put in the money dollar for dollar with the government. Amazing, worthwhile project. Everyone said, no controversy. I didn't hear anything of the Child Health Institute. Well, I don't hear anything of it these days. But then again, I don't hear anything about the other leading edge unit that used to be so high profile, the craniofacial unit here in South Australia. To me, if science can preempt disability and cure childhood disease in utero, whether it's China or whether it's in Adelaide, it would have to be the holy grail of pediatrics, not something that you would put somebody in jail for. But as I say to you often, I'm amazed that people forget. A lot of people put money into that Child Health Research Institute to do this genetic work here in Adelaide. They've possibly forgotten. It got written up in the papers, but those journalists have probably died. I don't know. But it's 30 years down the track, and somebody in China is in jail for doing what we were doing all that time ago. I would love somebody to tell me if that unit is still in existence and if it is doing the work we set it up to do. I hope it is. Thank you for viewing the Court of Public Opinion, ladies and gentlemen. See you tomorrow. Believe in yourself, and goodbye for now.